Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's episode of the podcast. I'm Sophie, and joining me today is Jack. Hey, Jack. How are you?
Hi, Sophie. I'm doing great, thanks. How about you?
I'm good too. Thank you. So, Jack, today we have a really interesting topic to talk about. It's something that a lot of people feel when they are learning English. Our topic is, I understand English, but I can't speak it well. Does that sound familiar to you, Jack?
Yeah, definitely. That's something I've heard a lot from people learning English. I think a lot of learners understand English when they listen to it or read it, but they struggle when it comes to speaking.
Exactly. I think it's so common. And I've had that feeling too. Sometimes I can understand what people are saying to me, but when it's my turn to speak, I can't find the right words, or I get nervous and forget everything I know.
That happens to a lot of people. You might understand everything, but when you have to speak, your mind goes blank, right? It's like your brain just freezes. And suddenly, you can't remember any words, even though you know them in your head.
Yes, exactly. And it's frustrating because you feel like you should be able to speak better since you understand the language. But the truth is, understanding and speaking are two different skills. You can be really good at one and still struggle with the other.
That's so true. And there's another problem too. Many people feel embarrassed or self-conscious when they speak. They worry that their accent or their grammar might be wrong. That fear can hold them back from practicing and improving.
I know. And the fear of making mistakes can stop us from speaking altogether. We get too worried about saying something wrong, and that stops us from trying. But the thing is, making mistakes is a part of learning. If we don't speak, we'll never improve.
Right? And we have to remind ourselves that nobody speaks perfectly all the time. Even native speakers make mistakes. So, it's okay if we don't get everything right when we speak. The important thing is to keep practicing.
That's a great point. The more we practice speaking, the easier it becomes. But sometimes, it's hard to find opportunities to practice, especially if you don't live in an English-speaking country.
Yes, exactly. That's something I hear from a lot of learners. They feel like they don't have enough chances to speak English. But there are actually a lot of ways to practice speaking without living in an English-speaking country.
That's true. For example, you can find language exchange partners online. There are apps and websites where you can connect with people who want to practice English, and you can help them with your language too. That way, both of you can improve together.
That's a great idea. You can also join online language learning groups or forums. There are often video calls or group chats where you can practice speaking with other learners. Even if you're not speaking with a native speaker, it still helps to practice with someone.
Exactly. And you can also try speaking to yourself in English. It might feel a little strange at first, but it really works. You can talk about your day, describe what's happening around you, or explain things in English. This will help you get used to thinking in English and speaking more naturally.
That's a really good tip. Another thing is to practice speaking with media. For example, you can watch movies or TV shows in English, then pause and try to repeat the sentences you hear. It's like shadowing, where you try to copy the way the actors speak.
I love that. Shadowing is such a fun way to improve your speaking. And it's good for your pronunciation too, because you're copying the sounds and rhythm of the language. It's a great way to sound more natural when you speak.
Right. And you can also use apps that help with speaking. There are apps where you can record yourself speaking and get feedback. Some apps even have speech recognition to check your pronunciation and give you tips on how to improve.
I think using technology to practice speaking is amazing. And it's so easy to do. You can practice anytime, anywhere, even if you're just walking or waiting for the bus. All you need is your phone.
Exactly. Technology makes it so easy to practice English now. But, Sophie, do you think there are other reasons why people struggle to speak, even if they understand English?
That's a good question. I think one big reason is that people often focus too much on grammar. They want to speak perfectly, using the right grammar and vocabulary, and they get stuck thinking about the rules. This makes it harder to speak freely.
That's so true. I think learners should focus more on communication rather than getting everything perfect. When we speak, it's more important to get the message across than to worry about making every sentence grammatically correct.
Yes, exactly. The goal is to communicate, not to be perfect. And even if you make a small mistake, as long as the other person understands you, it's okay. I think the more relaxed we are about making mistakes, the easier it will be to speak.
I completely agree. And I think it's also helpful to think of speaking as a skill you improve over time. Just like how we improve other skills, like riding a bike or playing an instrument, speaking takes practice.
That's a great comparison, Jack. The more you practice, the better you get. And just like with any other skill, you won't become perfect overnight. But if you keep practicing, you will definitely improve.
Exactly. So, if you're learning English and you feel like you understand it but can't speak it well, don't worry. It's a normal part of the learning process. The key is to keep practicing, stay confident, and don't be afraid to make mistakes.
So, Jack, let's dive a little deeper into the importance of confidence when it comes to speaking. We've mentioned how making mistakes is okay, but sometimes it's really hard to get over that fear of speaking, right?
Yeah, confidence plays a huge role in speaking a language. If you're too nervous or scared to speak, you won't practice as much, and that can slow down your progress. But the more you speak, the more your confidence grows, even if you make mistakes along the way.
Exactly. I think one way to boost your confidence is to start small. For example, maybe start by speaking with a friend or a language exchange partner who you feel comfortable with. You don't have to have a big conversation right away. Just small, casual talks can make a big difference.
That's a great point. It's important to start in an environment where you feel safe. And it's helpful to have people around you who are supportive and patient too. The more positive feedback you get, the more confident you'll feel.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remind ourselves that confidence comes from experience. The more you do something, the more comfortable you become with it. So, if you're practicing speaking a little bit every day, you'll start to see progress and feel better about it.
And it's okay to have bad days too. There will be moments when you feel like you're not improving or that you're still struggling. But that's normal. Everyone has those days. What matters is that you keep going and don't give up.
Exactly. And one thing I like to tell myself is that it's not about being perfect, it's about progress. As long as I'm getting a little better each time I speak, that's what counts. And even if I feel like I'm not improving, I try to look back at how far I've come.
Right? That's such a good mindset to have. Celebrating small victories is so important. Maybe today you were able to say a sentence you couldn't say last week, or maybe you understood something in a conversation that was difficult before. These little steps are progress, and they should be celebrated.
Exactly. And if you're not sure where to start, you can try setting small, realistic goals for yourself. Like you could say, today, I will have a 5-minute conversation in English, or I will learn and use 3 new phrases today. These small goals will help keep you motivated.
That's a great idea. Having specific goals can give you something to work towards and make your practice more focused. And it's important to be patient with yourself too. Learning a language is a journey, not a race.
Exactly, Jack. Now, we've been talking a lot about speaking practice, but let's also talk about listening. Sometimes, people say that they understand English when they listen, but they can't speak it well because they don't hear the words clearly in conversation. What do you think about that?
That's a good point. Listening and speaking are really connected. If you're not used to hearing natural, fast-paced conversations, it can be hard to speak yourself. But just like speaking, you need to practice listening as well. And I don't just mean listening to slow, simple English. It's also really useful to listen to native speakers in real-life conversations.
That's true. Watching TV shows or movies, especially with subtitles, can help with listening. And listening to podcasts like this one is a great way to hear how native speakers talk naturally. Try to pay attention to how we stress certain words or phrases. It's not just about the words themselves, but also about how they're said.
Yes, listening helps you understand the rhythm and flow of the language. And when you hear the words used in context, you start to remember them better. You can also repeat what you hear to practice pronunciation and to get more comfortable with how the language sounds.
Exactly. It's like learning a song. The more you hear it, the easier it is to remember the lyrics. The same goes for English. And speaking of listening, there's something I've noticed. Sometimes when people understand English but struggle to speak, they're not always active listeners. They may just be passively hearing the words but not really focusing on them. What do you think?
That's a great point, Sophie. Active listening is so important. It's about really paying attention to what the person is saying, not just waiting for your turn to speak. When you listen actively, you absorb more of the language, and you can start to understand how to use words and phrases in different situations.
Yes, active listening helps you think in English too. If you're really focused on understanding, you'll naturally begin to process the language in your head, and that makes it easier when it's your turn to speak. You'll find the right words faster.
And when you focus on listening, you also start to notice intonation and emotion in the language. For example, the way someone says thank you can change depending on how they feel. It could be warm and friendly, or it could be sarcastic. By paying attention to these things, you start to understand English on a deeper level.
That's so true. It's not just about understanding the words, but also about understanding the meaning behind those words. I love how listening helps you connect to the culture of the language, too. You start to understand how people use language in real life.
Right. And I think once you're comfortable with listening, speaking becomes a lot easier. When you understand what others are saying, it gives you the confidence to respond. So, we can say that listening practice and speaking practice go hand in hand.
Yes, they do. And if you can get comfortable with both, it will make speaking feel a lot more natural. Now, Jack, as we're wrapping up today's episode, do you have any final tips for people who are learning English and feel like they understand it but can't speak it well?
My first tip is, start small. Don't pressure yourself to speak perfectly. Speak as much as you can, even if it's just a few words a day. Second, find a language partner or join a community where you can practice without fear of judgment. And lastly, celebrate progress, no matter how small it seems.
Those are excellent tips. And I'd add that you should also remember that everyone learns at their own pace. It's okay if it takes time. What matters is that you're making an effort and improving little by little.
Absolutely. And remember, don't be afraid to make mistakes. They are part of the process. The more you speak, the better you'll get, and the more confident you'll feel.
Great advice, Jack. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts today. And thank you to everyone listening. We hope this episode helps you feel more confident and motivated to keep practicing your English. Yes. So, our message to you is, keep speaking, keep practicing, and remember that it's okay to make mistakes. Over time, you'll notice that speaking becomes easier and your confidence will grow.
Absolutely. So, that's all for today's episode. We hope this discussion helps you feel more motivated to practice speaking English. If you have any tips or questions, feel free to share them with us. We'd love to hear from you.
Thank you for listening. And remember, practice makes perfect. Until next time, happy learning.
Thanks for listening, everyone. Keep practicing, stay positive, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Take care and happy learning.
Take care, everyone.